They're bugging me because the
Green sleeves.
undershirt is longer than the flannel shirt, and it's annoying me.
It looks kind of cool, I think.
So I actually like the shirt, but I was a little chilly, so I layered up because it was a tad nippy this morning.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to our discussion of wardrobe and temperatures
This came up
and multiple beverages.
faster than it usually does. Usually takes a minute to get rolling.
Can freak you out when things actually work right.
I was like, what's going on?
What is happening?
What's going on? You do have multiple beverages in similar mugs.
Well, one is the classic real life tumbler.
The classic.
And the other is the classic Air Force travel mug. So
Both.
there we have it.
Both notable groups here.
Yes, I've spent more time at real life than I did in the Air Force. So
How many years were you in the Air Force?
4.
Oh, so you have
3.5 actually, because when Desert Storm wrapped up, they had a early out for my job had disappeared, and so I was trying to cross train. There wasn't a really good option, so
you didn't
got out 6 months
so you
early.
didn't do anything with Desert Storm.
No, I was in Desert Storm.
Oh.
I was not there. I was stateside doing intelligence with NSA at the time.
Can't talk about it.
Well, it's probably all declassified now if I remembered any of it. But that's one of the easiest way to get good clearance is by having a short attention span, and I have no idea what I did. So,
Good. These are the hands that our country was.
Oh, I know in the moment. I just tomorrow I don't know where I was yesterday, but it was one of those things where Shelley just got used to not knowing what I did all day. I mean, she knew it was a language thing. I was a linguist, and so, we were, as a German linguist, Germany reunified back in the early 90s. You were potty training, I think. And, actually it would have been 1990, right?
Yes, it
1990.
was.
And,
Dos.
and so anyway, we were, all of our worldly belongings went to Berlin. And
Wow.
we had been talking for some time about the fact that, hey, things are changing, and
The times they are
in
changing.
the infinite wisdom of the U.S. government and military leadership, they said, don't worry about it. Nothing's going to change. It's all good. And, so they reunified the currency, then they reunified the government, then they joined NATO, and all of a sudden our target, our enemy, during the Cold War became our ally, and we didn't know what to do. So
do you speak fluent German?
Well, as I just pointed out, I don't remember things.
Oh,
well. Once upon a time. And I can still speak enough to get myself in trouble, and every once in a while when my German brother, exchange student from high school, we became very close friends, and we've stayed in touch. So every once in a while he'll contact me, and I'll embarrass myself by attempting to speak German. And so
Very cool.
his English is excellent. But, he speaks multiple languages. He's an international salesperson. So he speaks German, French, Dutch, English, I think some Spanish and Italian, all these things. But
I saw a beautiful, I actually thought about you, and this is before I knew you spoke German. This morning I saw on Facebook some vintage store around here was selling a beautiful, gorgeous, illustrated everything German Bible.
Nice.
And it was solely in German. I'm like, wow, that's gorgeous.
We've got a couple of nice German Bibles here at the church that we inherited from historic St. John's when they closed down. So it's been cool. I love the language. I love languages in general.
It's a pretty ugly language. There's a guy on.
Depends on your
there's a guy on TikTok.
impression of ugly.
There's
It's a
guy on
beautiful
TikTok.
language. Is Polish. Polish is beautiful.
I don't know much Polish, and I am Polish. So. Sausage and salsa. Those are my two.
That sounds like a book, like a biography.
Like a really weird cookbook.
When Germany reunified, we went. They sent us to NSA and I ended up in a civilian office dealing with arms shipments, trying to keeping the bad guys from selling the guns to the other bad guys to use against our guys. So I worked in a Polish office for a minute.
That would never happen.
I did not speak Polish, so I had to learn that on the fly. Just
Polish.
not conversationally, but enough to be able to analyze. And spent most of that time working in Hungarian. Did not speak Hungarian, do not to this day. My sister-in-law lives in Hungary, and I Still don't, but I could read enough to analyze at that point and hand it over to somebody who was better. So
Well, there you go.
TikTok.
TikTok. You said TikTok.
TikTok. Tic Tac.
You're like one of
I
those
could use
people,
a Tic Tac.
You're like one of those people, you know what I can't stand? People who say pillow or milk.
Well, welcome to the Midwest.
I know. Annoying. Anyway, there's a guy on TikTok that he'll pick a word and then he'll go to Google.
He'll pick a word?
He'll pick a word and then he'll go to Google Translate, like ambulance. And he'll have it translated in French and do the speaker thing so it says it out loud, and it's beautiful, and Spanish, and it's beautiful, and all these other languages is beautiful, and then he'll go in German.
Yeah.
He's like screaming.
There was something, it might be the same guy. There was one on YouTube that was like that.
Yeah,
So.
it's funny. Anyway.
I spend more time on the YouTube machine than the Tech Talk.
The Tech Talk. Welcome to my TED Talk. Hello, everyone.
This is already longer than a TED Talk.
Well... Are you thankful for it?
I am thankful.
I'm thankful
that we
for
do
this podcast.
Podcast, yes.
I hope you all are.
I'm also
too.
thankful that I was able to have some milk on my cereal this morning.
You know what?
So.
I ain't thankful for that.
So yeah, we're talking about Thanksgiving stuff because Thanksgiving is this week, and
kind of sneaked up.
It's amazing how
my face is really illuminated.
Quickly things. Tore my ACL trying to close the window.
I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Here we go. Save the world.
I'm thankful for that. Thank you.
Are you glowing less or glowing differently?
I don't like to glow.
Now it's
Larry's
just,
not white, he's
just
clear.
Your internal glow
now my shirt keeps glowing anyway.
Well, it's not flickering like it was before.
My peanut butter shirt. Nice. Anyway, yes, we were talking about...
No more external glow, just the internal glow of your sparkling personality.
My aura.
Yes.
My aura would be like, I don't know.
Peanut butter.
Peanut butter color.
You have a peanut butter aura?
I'm down with that. Probably the only one I'd be down with.
Yeah.
That sounds like a cool band
We
name,
were
too.
actually podcasting, weren't we?
We were.
Peanut butter aura.
We are peanut butter aura!
That's nice. 90s cover band. We have a lot of 90s cover bands.
Oh, golly. Anyway, yes, Thanksgiving is this week. Are you ready?
Are you ready?
You'll be in Georgia.
Yes, it's been on my mind all week. So, yeah, we're actually
home of Coca-Cola. Home of Ludacris.
T.I.
Oh, I didn't know that one.
Chris Cross.
Like you jump.
TLC, also Atlanta.
TLC was Atlanta?
Jermaine Dupri was the producer for all of these.
Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Yes, so
well,
there's
you're just in
some
the hub, aren't you?
Yeah.
I went to my sister.
We're not going to Atlanta though. We're closer to Savannah. We'll be going to Fort Stewart.
My sister lived in Savannah for a time, and we went down.
Was her husband stationed at Fort Stewart?
I don't know. I feel like no. I feel like it was a different one.
That would be interesting to me, not to anybody else.
But it was. We went down there for Christmas one year, and two things bothered me. Everybody was super slow. I mean, like pace-wise, not
try
mentally.
going to Texas. It really slows down.
I have been in Texas, and
I love it.
I went to Dallas. Didn't feel slow to me, but San Antonio did.
Yeah. Because San Antonio is Texas. Dallas is Dallas.
Yeah, true. But everyone drove really slow, and if you want any kind of pop in a restaurant, they ask you what kind of Coke you want.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've been to the Southeast a couple of times, quick trips, but not any meaningful time. We lived in California, and out there it was similar. Everything was a Coke. Everything was very Midwest as far as the dialect, but there was a lot of the Coke thing.
I feel like Pepsi must be a very Midwestern thing.
Well, you could order a Pepsi. You just say,
what kind of Coke do you want? Pepsi.
Yeah, right.
No Pepsi, Coke.
So when I married Shelley, who grew up in Indiana and Illinois and Missouri and Idaho, but that was quite a bit before that. She always said soda, and we had growing up in Michigan, it was always pop.
Right.
And now my entire family says soda, and nobody says pop, and we have a big, pointless and silly debate about it because everybody knows it's pop. But anyway,
we've spent 10 minutes talking.
This is why people tune in, right?
Right.
To hear us talk about
content.
Foolish, inane,
foolish
pointless
games.
Stuff. Yeah. So
Jewel is from Alaska, not Georgia. Anyway, I can tell you where a lot of people are from, but that's not the point of this podcast today.
No, it's not.
So let's be realistic.
Yes.
You could, I mean, I honestly cannot recall, and I'm sure that we have in the past done every year at Thanksgiving some kind of sermon on thankfulness, right? I mean, you can't avoid it. It's always going to be...
I'm going to guess that more often than not, at Real Life, we have not done that. We probably do some, probably, I would say probably 50-50.
Okay.
Because
I'm
we
saying
don't
it's not...
generally, other than Easter, Palm Sunday, Easter, and Advent, we generally don't let holidays disrupt our preaching series. So whatever we're in.
But we were kind of at a free space this week.
Yeah.
We're not in the middle of a series, is what I'm saying.
Right. We ended Ephesians and we had 4 weeks, did 3 weeks on reforming the church. This seemed like a logical fit, and then we begin Advent next week. And very excited about our guest preacher next week, who will also join us, Lord willing, on the podcast next week.
We should probably reel in the pop culture talk when he gets here, and actually talk about things that matter.
Well, and I'll be excited. He's from Word Partners, a ministry in the Chicagoland area that trains pastors internationally, and been working with them through their core training and fellowship of the Word for 4 years, and really excited that our church is moving to begin a regular sponsorship and partnership with them. So I'm happy to have Dave DeHaan coming to preach. He'll actually kick off our Advent series, which is also unusual.
Because you're going to be in Georgia.
I've never been gone during that period before.
Sad.
And I'm very reluctant to bring in guest preachers that I don't know personally and can personally vouch for, so I generally don't. There have been a couple of times that I will bring somebody in on the word of someone else that I know, but
and regret
it. No, actually, the ones that that we've had, I don't know that we've ever had anybody that I can think of that that I would not have back.
Right.
And there are some that I keep trying to get and can't seem to get. A young friend of mine, I guess young to me, but old to you. Andy Lindgren, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so...
He's not old. He was a year older, or 2 years older than me, maybe.
Yeah, he was same class as Maggie.
Yeah, 2 years, because Paul was a year older than me.
Yeah, so I've been trying to get Andy for a while, but he's,
busy.
Yeah, he's doing his thing. And praise God. I'm speaking of thankfulness, I am just thankful that God is active in the church. He's not leaving us here to do our own thing. And when we look around, it can get discouraging. This is me turning serious. It can get very discouraging when you look around and you see the state of the church in America. And when I say, well, I think the two are tied. And when I say church in that context, I'm using it very loosely because I would be loath to call most of what we know as progressive Christianity or liberal theology. I would not consider that the church. That's not Christianity. It's a different religion, and so if I refer to those purveyors of false teaching as pastors, it's kind of a misnomer. So it's a very loose term in that sense, and it can be very discouraging when we see the decline of the church, and yet the mass draw to these seeker-driven churches, to prosperity gospel churches. I don't know that there's a draw necessarily to the progressive Christianity, liberal theology stuff, movement. I don't know, can you call it a movement if it's not actually moving? Because those are the churches that are most in decline. However, they seem to have a pervasive influence through the culture. And unfortunately, that's causing great harm to unbelievers and the nominal Christians who have been in church but are often not believers, and that's true everywhere. I mean, the reality is, you can, to borrow the old adage used by many and popularized in my lifetime by Keith Green, that going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to McDonald's makes you a hamburger, or sitting in the car in the garage makes you a car. I think Lewis said that, or someone along that line. So we need to recognize that every time we get together and we're singing songs together as the body of Christ, and we're opening God's Word as the body of Christ, we have to recognize that within the family, we also have guests who are not part of the family. Some consciously, some not consciously. Some who are there, but they're disconnected from the head, and
Right.
we need to be mindful of that. So even as we're going through a podcast like this today, eventually we do talk about the content, and now 15 minutes in, we're going to actually take a look at it. Well, when we're talking about the kind of thanksgiving that makes up true Christian worship, the gratitude, the praise that comes from Christians engaging with God, it's rooted outside of ourselves and outside of our blessings. It's not just
Right.
God did this for me, look how good God is.
Right.
Yes, there's that, but that's part of it. The whole is recognizing, and I think John Piper does a great job of bringing this out, is recognizing that my desire can't be, ultimately it's not, even when I think it is, for the things that God does. The deepest desire of the human soul is for God himself. And so when we try to fill that, when we try to meet that desire with all these other things in life, whether it's a sense of control, a sense of belonging, all the things that help us to climb up Maslow's pyramid, all of these things, outside of him, we miss it. We end up disappointed, disillusioned, disenfranchised, just generally dissed. And so as we're contemplating Thanksgiving, I felt like it was important for us to take a look at what the Scripture says about actually praising God because of who he is. And, we talked a little bit about, what happened that first Thanksgiving, as we call it, back in Massachusetts in 1621. And I think people forget how, well, I know we do, and it's being assaulted by the revisionist historians now. We look at the Puritans as some, frozen, they're just stodgy, and
Right.
They were English, so they're going to have this stiff upper lip kind of thing. They were focused in many ways
Don't offend our UK audience.
It's the
true.
nature of it,
Right.
and it's something that isn't necessarily to be looked down upon, but different people are going to behave different ways. But to act like the Puritans didn't enjoy life, didn't have
Right.
fun, all they ever did was focus on thou shalt not. Well, these were Calvinist Christians who believed in God's grace in a huge way, but they also, because of God's grace, believed in God's holiness and the holiness of believers. So anyway, that I didn't mean to get off on that. And did it go wrong? Well, of course it did, because whenever humans are involved, things go wrong, and we end up getting off track, and there's all sorts of corruption that comes in. But as we're looking back on them and what they're thankful for, it's not because things were going so great. It's because they survived, and
Right.
as there were 102 of them that started. There were 53 of them, I think, that lived to the celebration, and some of them were babies that had been born since they got there.
Right.
At least one was born on the passage over. Great name for a kid born on a ship at sea. They called him Oceanus. And so, anyway, as you're seeing all that, their praise for God, according to Edward Winslow's letter, was not because everything was prosperous all the time.
Right.
They did have a successful harvest after a year of suffering and misery and disease and privation and lack of shelter. And the idea that every time the white man came, it went bad for the natives, and the natives were savage, and all these kinds of things. Neither of those things are universally true.
Right.
Both of those things are partially true, because human beings are sinful by nature. There is no, good person, and Jesus was very clear about that. So we see the 90 natives and the 53 pilgrims. We think of the pilgrims, or we think of it as half and half, or whatever. It wasn't that. And they were from different places,
right.
Not just different places geographically, but different places spiritually. So the natives had their, if we could call it tribal worship, they were spiritual people, but they did not know Christ. They did not know the Christ, the God of the Bible, and the pilgrims did, but they didn't hate them. They,
right.
They loved them and worked together. And there was at least one Christian native there, and we won't go into the story of Squanto right now, but it's a great story. You should check it out. Anyway, as they gathered together, the focus. I'm looking at Winslow's words here, and he says, "Although it be not always so plentiful as it was at this time with us, yet by the goodness of God, we are so far from want that we often wish you, the recipients of the letter, we wish you partakers of our plenty." They got together to be able to give praise to God, to recognize that God had gotten them this far,
mm-hmm.
that everything that was good came from God, that everything that went wrong also was given by God's hand and for God's purposes, and in His sovereignty worked out for our ultimate good and His ultimate glory, even that which resulted in the death of their loved ones. That's hard to swallow. Yeah. And so, it kind of leaves me with the question of, what would our lives look like if our focus was gratitude, if our hearts were sensitive enough toward God to live a life of incessant gratitude, where we are thankful without ceasing.
Oh, good, because I forgot which one it actually was. You also talked about Psalm 95 yesterday, and when I think of the Psalms, a lot of them anyway, they both excite me and confuse me, because I like music and I like reading lyrics, and that's technically what they are, and poetry, and but a lot of the Psalms are crying out to God, and a lot of them are, when you read them, they can seem kind of negative and oh my goodness, Lord, why this?
Yeah, and if it's just a random reading, that's kind of weird
right.
to deal with.
But then at the same time, you get to Psalm like 95, and it's about Thanksgiving technically, and so to me, between that and then you read the Edward Winslow's letter, and thinking about that quote unquote first Thanksgiving, I think a lot of it today, we live in this society where it's just want, and if we don't, we expect instant gratification with everything,
right.
because we're so used to it. And I'm not saying that like we need to go back to those places, but that really strips it down, both of these things.
There's a certain appreciation
right.
that comes with suffering, and,
right?
And certainly we don't want to go back to having less health and less prosperity and not having homes to shelter in. But when you don't have those things, you begin to appreciate them differently.
Right.
When you grow up, without a healthy family, then it gives you a new appreciation for wanting to have a healthy family. And when you discover that, it can be hard to process, but wow, what a great thing to be able to have. And so when you look at, the pictures or videos of the, little kids in Ethiopia or Uganda or wherever, and in a village where they don't have much, and they're struggling to get clean water, and yet these little kids are out there kicking around
laughing,
something that
right.
they're using for a soccer ball that they found, and they're the happiest kids. You see kids in the U.S. and they've got iPhones and
Right.
all these
Tablets
things, and they're
and
depressed
right,
and they're
right.
struggling, and wealth does not in any way equate to happiness, but gratitude does. There's such a correlation between your level of thankfulness and your level of happiness that if we could all step back and appreciate the fact that God owes us nothing,
Right.
and we owe him everything, and the fact that we are alive today is 100% his mercy and his grace. That every breath I take is an act of grace from God.
And every move you make.
He's watching me, and it's actually a good thing and not creepy like
Right,
the
like
police.
Sting.
But if Sting's watching me, then we may have some issues to deal with.
It's not just, I think a lot of people, when they think about thankfulness, it's for the things that they have.
Yes.
And a lot of material things. I saw a commercial the other day. I think it might have been on Hallmark, but I don't remember what it is for exactly. It was about a boy who got adopted. And, he was a teenager, but it was his first time being adopted. I guess he was in the foster care system for a long time. And it was his first time having his own room, or his first time, they were having a family dinner, and he wasn't used to that. And it just, things like that just make you think, like, it almost takes... You never know what somebody else is going through until you go through it yourself.
Right. No,
and that's
that's
not
true.
always going to be possible. Like, obviously I'm not going to get adopted by somebody, but...
But we can let our hearts go
Right.
there. We can,
and that kind of gratitude for
empathize.
something that is so easy for other people to take for granted is really what kind of clicked for me with this. And yeah.
I think that's kind of what happened with Israel as we look at Psalm 95. And again, looking at the Psalms for most of my life, I just saw it like most people do, as this random collection of songs and prayers. And I understood this as Israel's hymn book and all those kinds of things. But most of us, when we think of the Psalms, who do we think of? David. And okay, there are some that are not from David, but we think of David. Well, there are a lot that are not from David. There are actually a number of authors, and they're in a number of different situations, and it's spread over literally generations. As you're going from David to the time of the compilation of the book of Psalms, which I think helps us understand it. The book of Psalms was compiled, it was put together as a book in the order that it's put together and organized as it is in the post-exilic period. So after Israel's, after David's reign and Solomon's reign and all the bad kings and a couple of good kings that pop up in there, and the divided kingdom, and Israel goes into exile as Assyria takes over, and then Judah hangs on, and God grants them more time, and they continue to go the same way Israel did. And so they are ungrateful to God, and they become like everybody else. And even to the point of Judah's kings introducing idol worship into the temple of God. And we looked at that a little bit a couple weeks back with 2 Kings 22, and it had gotten so bad that they had to go through a whole rebuilding project, not rebuilding, but a renovation project to redo the temple. And in the process, they find the book of the law, and they read it, and they cut to the heart, and they have a revival that sparked there during Josiah's time. But that didn't last.
Right.
And they do the same things. They turn their back on God. The lack of thankfulness took them in a direction separate from God. And so they began to live just like the pagan people, and God turned his back on them, just like he did back in the wilderness, just like he did with the pagan nations. And they go into exile in Babylon, and God had told them, this is going to happen for 70 years, then I'm going to bring you back. He does that because God keeps his promises. He does what he says he's going to do. They come back to Jerusalem. They rebuild the temple, or they rebuild the walls, or the temple, and they're going through this whole restoration process. And they don't come back to the full nation status as they did previously. The consequences remain. But through this whole journey of being separated from God, this exile, they were in the darkest of places, wondering, has God turned his back on us forever? Is there any hope? Have we sinned too much? Have we gone too far? Has God just utterly rejected us? And the book of Psalms is divided up into 5 books, 5 sections. The first is kind of almost a composite of the rest, almost like somebody was talking about the first portion of James being like a table of contents for the rest of the book. And book 1 of the Psalms is a little bit like that. We see this story arc played out in the life of David, as he's God's chosen, he's God's king, and he struggles and falls, and they face opposition, and so there's this picture of the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23 that's kind of carried through the whole book of Psalms. So then in the next 4 books, we see that same kind of an arc happen with the nation. So in book 3, they're in the darkest of places. They're rejected, they're in exile, and it's reflected in the heaviness of those Psalms. Now in book 4, and Psalm 95 is toward the end of book 4, they're not restored yet, but they're beginning to see, they've heard the promise of God. They're beginning to see and recognize the promise of restoration. Their hearts are being turned. And in Psalm 95, this song of thanks and praise, if we look at it in that context and we see it as these are people in exile. These are people who are hurting. And this may be, we don't know when Psalm 95 was written. It may have been written at the compilation. But it's placed here as a reflection of this place in their lives. So this is an aspirational sort of thanksgiving as far as the things that are done. Having looked back, and we have several Psalms on both before and after this that recount the deeds of God for his people Israel, which is the testimony, it's the witness of his character, of his great faithfulness, his steadfast loving kindness, his love endures forever. And that credo is beginning to take root in them. So now in Psalm 95, and I'll just, as we get here toward the end, I'll just read the text of it, and hopefully we'll be able to see how this plays out. The psalmist writes, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song." So there's a vibrance, there's an exuberance, they're excited about it. But there's also a choice. Mm-hmm. We have to choose to come and sing. We have to choose to let our praises ring out and extol him. There's a consciousness about it because he is the rock of our salvation, or other renderings call it, he is our rock and our salvation. But he who is our strong place, our defender, and our rescuer, in himself is worthy of our praise. And then it goes on in this kind of middle section of the psalm to give us the basis for this joyful thanksgiving. It says, "For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land." So we see this creator God and the vastness and majesty and power. I'm reminded of Romans 1 where Paul draws our attention to the fact that you can see these invisible qualities of God in creation. Mm-hmm. No one has an excuse. Every single person, and this is why we see tribal religions, the ancient mythologies, that all have pieces and reflections, perhaps refracted pieces of it. But you can see these distorted images of the living God. And only the Bible gives us that full revelation, but there are hints in all of the heroic tales, in all of the virtue tales, in all of the different societies. You see elements of God because he created all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's the same kind of thing that Job ran into when he's saying, well, if God just would show up, then I would stand before him blameless and he would exonerate me. And God showed up, and he didn't accuse Job of sin. In fact, we're told that Job didn't sin in turning against God or being ungrateful. But God did rebuke him just by his presence, by saying, where were you? I'm God. I created all these things. I hold this in my hand. You're just a dude, right? And so that brings Job to his knees. And then he continues. So we see this creative aspect, that God is supreme and sovereign, and that he is the great God, the king over all gods. He holds the depths of the earth, the mountain peaks, and the seas. And it says in verses 6 and following, "Come, let us bow down and worship." So there's an immediate awe when we recognize God. There's the holy terror. I think Francis Chan brings that out pretty well in his basics video, talking about the fact that, I was learned about having to, fearing God. We don't like that term. It doesn't sound nice. And so we learn, it's a holy respect. It's a holy reverence. And he said, but when I look at the scriptures, that's not what I see. What I see is terror.
Right.
Because this is God.
Right.
And anyway, so there is that, but then there is also the choice to respond to that.
Right.
And that's when we see the fear of the Lord, it is the right response to understanding who God is. So there is the terror aspect of it, and then there is the voluntary reverence that goes along with that. And we choose to express that in worship. Come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel. Notice the humility in this humble posture of kneeling. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. So as Israel is seeing this, the psalmist is calling them to remember that he is the great God. All the nations see that, or should see that. And when Israel is doing what Israel is supposed to do, they all do see that. The nations see that. But Israel needs to remember that we have a special relationship with him. He's called us to be his. As Christ followers, we're able to recognize that. But I think we maybe don't focus on it enough, that God has called us to a special relationship with himself. It's not just acknowledgement that God is. It's not just the acknowledgement that God is great. It's recognizing that he is all of these things, that he is vast, he is other, he is beyond, he is infinitely holy. And yet he chooses to make us his so that we can have this sheep-shepherd relationship with him. There's a tenderness to it. And then the warning that comes at the end, the rest of the book, the rest of the chapter here is really, it's a statement of what happened in Exodus 17, but it's also a warning to us today that if our hearts are not sensitive to the Lord, if our hearts are sensitive to God, then we will be filled with joyful thankfulness, gratitude, appreciation. If we don't have that, if we instead think, well, why hasn't God blessed me like he's blessed others? And we begin to have resentful attitude, or we begin to feel entitled, like God, I deserve better.
Right.
Why me, Lord? Why is this bad stuff happen to me? Rather than why do I deserve any of your love at all? Because I certainly don't. So he says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massah in the desert, where your fathers tested and tried me. Though they had seen what I did, for 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, there are people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And what had happened basically in a nutshell is, they're like 5 minutes out of Egypt, right? Everything has really gone amazingly. God shows up. They cried out for deliverance from their bondage. God comes, delivers them. We know the story of the 10 plagues, and Moses, brings them out. They experienced this. This isn't the next generation. These are the folks who actually just left Egypt. They haven't even gotten across to Sinai yet. They're getting there, and they watch him part the Red Sea and swallow up the Egyptian army. They saw the plagues. They saw Pharaoh send them out. They saw the Egyptians hand over their goods. I mean, that gets overlooked in the story a lot of the time. But the Egyptians are like, here, have my stuff. And so they're leaving with plunder, having no reason to have it other than God said so.
Right.
They watched as God manifested himself in a pillar of cloud in the daytime and a pillar of fire at night. They actually saw all this stuff. But then they get to the hardship, and it is a legitimate hardship. You're in the wilderness, you don't have water, they're struggling. That's legitimate. But instead of focusing on all that God has done, their focus is on what God has not done. Where are the gaps? Why didn't God take care of us better? And they grumbled against God. And that is a clearly condemned sinful attitude, and that puts us at odds, at enmity with God. What would happen in our lives? What would have happened in Israel's life? And what would happen in mine and yours if instead of focusing on all of the things that are wrong, it's muddy today, or, this my car broke down, I've got a leaky roof, or I ripped my pants, or my family's falling apart, or from the smallest thing to the biggest thing, it can really wreck our day, right? Somebody didn't put our taco together right in the drive-through, which is an irritating thing. So, and rather than being grateful that we live in a place where we can actually go to a drive-through and get excessive amounts of food, not enough to survive, but to enjoy. The fact that we have taste buds to enjoy the food, and food that actually tastes good for us to enjoy, rather than appreciating and praising God for all of these things, we tend to be ungrateful, to feel like God owes us something. He owes us nothing. Yeah. So to have real thanksgiving, true thanksgiving, is rooted in the person of God more than in the gifts of God.
And these are choices. That's
absolutely.
And
gratitude is a choice.
That doesn't mean it's easy. And I think especially at the holidays, people, there's supposed to be this time of joy and happiness and peace, but for a lot of people they're not. And whether you're missing a loved one or you're lonely or whatever, it's easy to feel down and like, why me, and things aren't the way that I wanted them to be.
Right.
And
it's our natural human tendency.
And so it's hard to make that choice at times. But I don't know. I don't know what you're the pastor. I don't know what my personal advice would be to make that choice. Obviously just do it, but
it's Nike therapy.
Right.
Just do it. It's
just
because something is hard doesn't make it complicated.
Right.
I think that's one of the things we fall into is but how? How do we do it?
Right.
You just do it.
Right.
You just choose to be thankful for what you have rather than lament what you do not. And like you said, that's not easy, but there's a huge difference between easy and simple. It's very simple.
Right.
It's very difficult.
A lot of these therapy blogs that I write for they're trying to help people with depression or anxiety. One of the things that's often suggested is to keep a gratitude journal.
Yeah.
And to just keep a little notebook around with you wherever you go. And then if you just think of, either you can do it, in the morning when you wake up, write down 10 things you're grateful for. Before you go to bed, write down 10 things that happened that day that you're grateful for. Or just when you think of something, if you're at a coffee shop, just write it down. And then not only in the moment does that make you stop and think of everything you have, but what I think the interesting thing is you can look back. And especially when you're feeling like, woe is me, why is God not answering me? Why do I not have it? You can look back for pages and pages of all these things in your life, big or small, that you actually do have that you should be grateful for. And doing that is a choice.
And it helps make us more self-aware, too.
Right.
Sometimes we don't think that we complain much until we write down. If we're writing down all of these things and we see, wait a minute, this is supposed to be gratitude, and I'm writing down complaints. Then we start to recognize maybe I have a little bit more of a negative attitude than I ought to have.
Right.
And it's not something external to us. It's an inside job. Gratitude is a choice, and it comes from within. And I'm reminded of the very you sent me these spiritual TikToks. A little while back, a very popular meme. Remember the video of the little kid with the avocado.
It's an avocado.
It's an avocado.
Thanks.
And it's funny, but it's such a sincerity that this kid has, and we laugh at it almost mockingly, but really it should be somewhat convicting to us, because there are joys that we will never know while we're waiting for things to bring us joy. But if we can find the reality of joy in Christ, and Christ becomes more precious to us than the things of this life, then there's a joy that can't be taken away. And it changes everything. It changes our attitude, changes our outlook. And when we change our attitude, our outlook, it changes our behaviors. Then our feelings change. Everything begins to change. We do things differently. Then our light shines in a way that brings glory and honor to our Father in heaven. And so, I'm reminded again of Piper's, it's his main thing that he says with Christian hedonism, that God is most glorified in me when I'm most satisfied in him. That is a picture of thankfulness. When I am finding my satisfaction, my deepest, highest desire met in Him. Not in the things that He gives or doesn't give, but in God, in Christ Himself. That's when God receives the most glory, and that's when I'm the most happy.
We will end there because we've gone way over.
Yeah.
In all fairness, we talked for 10 minutes about nothing. It's like a Seinfeld
It's a
episode.
show about nothing.
So we will stop there. Our Advent series, as we mentioned earlier, starts next week. So stick around for that. If you're in the area, in the Three Oaks area, join us. And join us for on the 5th of December at historic St. John's, still in Three Oaks, for a community carol sing. Everybody's invited. Come sing some Christmas carols.
Pretty pumped about it.
Good times. For now, if you have any questions or comments, as usual, you can send us an email at somethingreal@reallifeonline.org. Leave us a comment on Facebook or YouTube, or a voicemail on Anchor, or at 269-756-RLCC.
We are interested in your feedback.
We are interested in your feedback.
If there are things that we can help you with, or things that you can help us with, that we'd love
There's
to
a
have
lot that
so.
you can help us with. We were just talking before the podcast, and New Year's coming up, and if there's any time to reflect on things and make changes, that seems like an appropriate one. So as we move forward, we obviously want to hear any feedback or any suggestions or things that you'd like to hear and see in the future from us. Less pop culture references, more. Fewer, not less.
More WKRP and Cincinnati references?
Yes.
The world is better then.
Yes, it was. And in the 90s. But we will stop there for today. Do you have anything else?
So many things.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Now I'm thinking of WKRP in Cincinnati.
I'm thinking of the 90s.
I'm thinking of turkeys dropping from helicopters. But all right.
Happy Thanksgiving. Go watch Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. Have some popcorn and toast. It'll be a good time. We'll
Peace.
see you next week with our special guest. Don't miss it.
Don't miss it.